The sun had barely risen over the Arizona desert, yet the air already shimmered with heat around the Army base. A row of Apache helicopters rested on the tarmac, their long blades still, their shadows stretching across the sand like sleeping giants. Inside the maintenance yard, a young woman named Sergeant Lisa Morgan worked quietly, her movements steady and sure. She didn't speak much to the others in the crew. Most of them were loud, joking soldiers, teasing each other, tossing wrenches, talking about weekends or new gear. Lisa stayed in her corner, focused only on the machine in front of her. She was short, with brown hair tucked under her cap, and had a calm way of moving, careful, efficient, like someone who had done this work for years. Her job was to prepare the Apache's weapons before flight. Every morning she checked the belts of 30mm shells, cleaned the cannon feed, and tested the hydraulic system that aimed the gun. She did it without complaint. Even when the sun beat down and the sand made her eyes sting, the pilots barely noticed her most days. To them, she was just part of the ground crew, someone who kept things running but never made a sound. But people who worked closely with her could tell she knew more than she let on. When new recruits joined, she could spot mistakes before they made them. She'd quietly correct a loose fitting, tighten a bolt, or warn them to stand back before a test cycle. She never bragged or raised her voice, but everyone respected her because nothing ever went wrong on her shift. That afternoon, the air was full of the smell of jet fuel and burning dust. The squadron had a major training flight scheduled, and the pilots were suiting up. Captain Ryan Hale, a decorated Apache pilot with years of combat experience, arrived late after a meeting with the commanding officer. He was tall, calm, and known for keeping his cool under pressure. He had seen almost everything during his years of service, or so he thought. When Ryan reached his helicopter, he saw Lisa working alone near the ammo compartment. She wore her green maintenance coveralls rolled to her elbows as she slid a long belt of ammunition into the gun feed. The belt was heavy, yet she handled it with surprising ease. Her sleeves were up, and for the first time Ryan noticed something on her forearm. A small black tattoo, faded but sharp enough to recognize. He froze in place. His eyes locked onto the mark, a triangle inside a ring with a serpent wrapping around it. He knew that symbol. It wasn't something you could just find in a tattoo shop. It was the insignia of Task Force Cerberus, a covert army unit that had been classified even among soldiers. That task force had been wiped out 5 years ago on a mission overseas. Everyone assigned to it was either killed in action or marked as missing. Ryan had been attached to Cerberus once as a liaison pilot before the mission went dark. The tattoo wasn't just a design. It was a silent bond shared only among its members. And now this quiet weapons technician had it on her arm. He stood there for a few seconds, his heartbeat quickening. She didn't notice him right away. She was focused, wiping her hands and checking the weapon mount. Finally, she turned and saw him staring. Their eyes met for a moment. Ryan tried to speak but couldn't, his voice caught. "Where did you get that tattoo?" he asked finally, his tone softer than he expected. Lisa looked down at her arm, then back at him. There was no surprise in her eyes, just calm understanding, like she had expected someone to ask one day. After a short pause, she said quietly, "From someone who saved me in Mosul." Her voice was steady, almost distant, before Ryan could ask more. She turned back to her tools, finished closing the panel, and walked away without another word. That answer didn't make sense. The Task Force Cerberus operation hadn't been in Mosul, not officially. And the only people who knew about it were under classified oath. Ryan stood beside the helicopter long after she left, the sound of other engines firing up around him. During the flight, he couldn't focus. His co-pilot noticed he was distracted, but Ryan just said he was fine. Yet his mind kept replaying the sight of that tattoo and her calm expression. He had read classified reports years ago. The mission that went wrong, the survivors who were never found. Could she have been part of that? She would have been too young, maybe mid-20s now. Unless she had been a field medic or part of the recovery crew. When the training flight ended, the sun was setting, painting the desert gold and orange. Ryan landed the Apache and shut down the system. But instead of heading to the mess hall like the others, he went back to the maintenance yard. He found her again, checking a box of shell casings. "Lisa," he said quietly. She looked up, brushing dust from her gloves. "Yes, Captain." "That tattoo, and it's from Cerberus," he said. "I served with them." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then you know what happened. Ryan nodded slowly. I thought I did. But your name was never on the roster. She gave a small, tired smile. It wasn't supposed to be. He wanted to ask more, but the tone in her voice stopped him. There was something final about it, a weight of memory he recognized. Soldiers who had seen too much often spoke that way. Before he could continue, the call for evening assembly came over the loudspeaker, and she excused herself, saying softly, "Some things are better left where they belong, Captain." That night Ryan couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet, but his thoughts were loud. He logged into his secure account and searched through old mission data, scrolling through classified archives that hadn't been touched in years. He found the name of every soldier on the Cerberus team. None of them matched her. But one record stood out, an unlisted field medic, marked only as M unknown, presumed lost. The file had no first name, no photo, no details, only one note in red. Subject recovered classified personnel, last seen in blackout zone. The next morning, when he went to the hangar, her workbench was empty. Her ID tag hung neatly on a hook. Her locker was open and clean. A supervisor told him she'd been transferred to a new posting. No one knew where. No one even questioned it. Ryan felt uneasy. Transfers usually came with weeks of notice and paperwork. This one seemed to happen overnight. He went to the commanding officer's office, but the reply was short. "You don't need to worry about her, Captain. She's been reassigned under higher authority." The way it was said made it clear. Don't ask again. But Ryan couldn't let it go. He replayed every word she had said, every expression she made. He remembered how she moved around the Apache, how she touched the weapon system like she had done it 100 times under real pressure. There was something different about her, something that didn't fit the story of a quiet mechanic. He went back to her workstation that night. The desert wind was cold and the lights flickered in the hangar. On the bench lay a small piece of cloth. Maybe she had dropped it. When he picked it up, he realized it was an old patch, almost worn away. It had the faint outline of the same Cerberus symbol, but below it, stitched in faded thread, were two words barely visible under the dust. For them. Ryan stood there for a long time, holding that patch, realizing that Lisa Morgan wasn't just another technician who happened to know her way around the Apache. She was someone who had carried the weight of a lost mission quietly, honoring those no one else remembered. He looked out toward the row of helicopters resting under the stars. The wind howled softly, carrying the sound of metal chains and distant echoes of engines. Somewhere out there, he thought, there were stories people had buried deep, stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival that no one would ever read in a report. Lisa Morgan was one of those stories. And though she had vanished again, her presence lingered. Ryan felt it every time he looked at the Apache's gun system, every time he heard the mechanical click of the weapon she had once cared for. She had left without a trace, but she had left something behind too. A quiet reminder that sometimes the bravest soldiers were the ones who stayed invisible. That night, Ryan made a decision. He printed out the forgotten mission file and kept it in a small folder in his flight bag. He didn't know if he'd ever find her again, or learn what truly happened in that blackout zone. But he knew one thing. If she had survived something like that, then she deserved more than to be forgotten. The next morning, before takeoff, he touched the side of the Apache, the same spot where she used to rest her hand before every launch, and whispered under his breath, "For them." The engines roared to life, echoing across the desert, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt like he was flying for more than just orders or missions. He was flying for someone who had already given everything, and asked for nothing in return. A few weeks passed since Lisa's sudden transfer, but Captain Ryan Hale couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he stepped into the cockpit, he would glance at the weapon console she used to service. Every sound, every hum from the Apache reminded him of her quiet precision and that mysterious tattoo that had shaken him to his core. He had seen strange things in his career. Secret missions, covert orders, unmarked cargo planes landing at night. But nothing had unsettled him like the calm in her eyes when she had said, "Someone who saved me in Mosul." There was a story buried in that line, one that official files would never tell. One evening, Ryan sat in his small quarters, the room half lit by his desk lamp. The desert wind rattled the window. In front of him lay the printed folder he had kept since that night. The Cerberus mission file. The unlisted medic's name had been blacked out, but now that he knew Lisa's full name, the letters faintly matched under the ink. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. She had been there. She had survived something terrible and lived quietly under a new name. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Why was she back on a base like this? Why near Apaches? Why under a cover so ordinary? The next morning, he got part of his answer. His commanding officer called a briefing in the operations tent. The upcoming training was being replaced with a live escort mission in a desert testing zone. A convoy of vehicles carrying experimental systems was moving under restricted clearance. Every pilot in the room straightened when the colonel added, "You'll have a civilian advisor on board. She's cleared under Project Revenant." Ryan froze. He had heard that name before. Revenant. It was a Pentagon program involving classified recovery work. It dealt with lost tech, failed missions, and the people who had been there. The colonel continued reading the list of assigned personnel, and when he reached Morgan, helps civilian consultant, Ryan's heartbeat quickened. That evening, Ryan walked out to the flight line where the convoy was being prepared. Dust swirled around trucks, generators, and rows of crates. A group of civilians in tactical gear checked instruments near a command trailer. And there she was, standing by a Humvee wearing a dark cap and desert jacket, her face half covered by a scarf. Lisa turned as if she sensed him before hearing his steps. A faint smile crossed her lips. "Didn't expect to see you again, Captain." Ryan approached slowly, unsure whether to salute or just speak. "Guess they transferred you to the middle of nowhere," he said. "Not exactly," she replied, glancing at the horizon. "Project Revenant doesn't do random." There was a quiet understanding between them, the kind that forms between soldiers who've seen things no one talks about. She looked stronger now, calm, confident, but there was still that same distance in her eyes, as if a part of her was always somewhere else. When the convoy moved out the next morning, the sky was pale and full of sand. Ryan's Apache flew overhead, guarding the line of vehicles as they crawled through the desert. It was supposed to be a simple escort. No threats, no surprises. But halfway through the route, a violent sandstorm rolled in, swallowing everything in golden dust. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Ryan's sensors flickered. Command ordered the convoy to halt and take shelter in an old bunker complex left from the Cold War. Ryan landed nearby, guiding his co-pilot through the swirling wind. When the rotors finally stopped, he saw Lisa among the crew, her jacket covered in sand. She motioned for the others to move crates inside the bunker. Inside, it was dark, the air thick with dust and the smell of rusted metal. Emergency lights glowed faint red. Once everyone settled, the storm outside roared like a living thing. Ryan sat against a concrete wall, his helmet beside him. Lisa was sitting a few feet away, scrolling through data on a tablet. For a long time, they said nothing. Then he asked quietly, "You were part of Cerberus, weren't you?" She stopped typing. For a few seconds, the only sound was the storm. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I was their medic." Ryan exhaled slowly, feeling the truth settle like dust. "Everyone thought that mission was lost." "It was," she said softly. "Almost everyone died." She looked down at her hands, her voice calm but distant. "We were sent in to extract a research team that had gone dark. The mission changed halfway through. The team wasn't what they said. We got trapped. Communications were cut. Command pulled the plug. They left us there." She paused, her eyes unfocused. "I stayed behind to treat the wounded. When the extraction finally came, only 2 of us were alive. The other one didn't make it home." Ryan listened in silence. Her tone wasn't bitter, but full of quiet acceptance, the kind soldiers use when the pain has been buried too long to show. "After that," she continued, "they erased us. I was given a new name and a new assignment. No medals, no records, just a promise that our work would be used to prevent it from happening again. That's what Project Revenant is. We recover what's been forgotten. Lost missions, old data, wrecked aircraft. We make sure their sacrifices mean something." Ryan studied her face, realizing the weight she carried every day without anyone knowing. "So that's why you were with the Apaches," he said quietly. "You were helping with the targeting upgrades," she nodded. "Cerberus used a prototype system. It failed during our mission. I helped redesign it." For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside pounded like thunder, shaking the walls. A soldier nearby adjusted a radio that only hissed static. In that dim bunker, surrounded by people who had no idea of her story. Lisa seemed both fragile and unbreakable. Ryan looked at her tattoo again, the faded Cerberus mark. "You kept the tattoo," he said. She gave a small smile. "It's not for the mission. It's for them, the ones who didn't come back." They sat in silence, the sound of the storm echoing through the tunnel. After a while, Lisa reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal tag, worn and scratched. She placed it on the table between them. "This was the medic's badge from our team lead. He told me to keep it if I made it out." Ryan stared at it, realizing it was the same kind of tag he had seen in the Cerberus file. "You still carry it?" "Every day," she said quietly. "It reminds me why I'm still here." When the storm finally cleared hours later, the sky turned deep blue again. The convoy prepared to move. Before they left, Ryan helped load some crates into a transport truck. As he handed her a box, she looked up and said, "You know, they called the Apache our angel back then. It was always the sound we hoped to hear when we were pinned down." Ryan gave a faint smile. "Then it's only fair that you're the one keeping it flying now." She looked at him, her expression soft. "No, Captain. You fly it. I'll keep it ready." Later, as the convoy reached base, Ryan filed his after-action report. He described the mission, the storm delay, the logistics, but when he came to Lisa's name, he hesitated. He knew her history was still classified. After a moment, he simply wrote, "Civilian consultant demonstrated exceptional skill and composure. Recommend retention and discretion." He didn't mention Cerberus. He didn't mention her tattoo or the story she told in the bunker. Some truths he knew weren't meant for paperwork. Over the next few weeks, they worked together quietly. Whenever his Apache needed adjustments, she'd be there, sleeves rolled up, focused, calm. She didn't talk about the past, and he didn't ask. But sometimes he'd catch her staring at the desert horizon, her eyes distant as if listening to ghosts carried by the wind. One evening after a long flight test, Ryan found her standing near the hangar watching the sunset. The orange light reflected off the Apache's glass like fire. He walked up beside her. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Every day. But then I remember I'm not done yet." Ryan nodded. He understood. For people like them, duty wasn't just orders, it was memory, a way of keeping promises made long ago. Before she left that evening, she took one last look at the Apache and placed her hand gently on the metal, whispering something he barely heard, "For them." Then she walked away into the fading light. Months later, Ryan was promoted and reassigned to another base. On his final day, he opened his flight bag and found something tucked inside. A folded piece of paper and a small metal tag. The paper had only one line written in neat handwriting. "The mission never ends. Keep flying." He smiled quietly, knowing exactly who had left it. He placed the tag in his pocket and stepped toward the waiting helicopter. As the rotors began to spin, the desert wind rose once more, carrying dust and memory across the horizon. Ryan glanced at the sky, thinking of the people who never made it home, and of one quiet woman who still carried their promise. He lifted off, the Apache rising gracefully against the glowing sunset. The base below shrank to a small blur, the desert stretching endlessly beyond. The radio crackled faintly in his ear, but he barely heard it. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace, the kind that comes when you know the right people are still out there, still watching, still keeping their silent vows. He whispered under his breath, "For them," and the Apache flew on into the endless sky, carrying the echo of stories no one would ever read, stories of loyalty, courage, and a tattoo that told the truth no file ever could.